As we continue to look at soil physical properties, let's examine now how structure and bulk density are affected by the proportion of soil particles. Besides texture, other physical characteristics are influenced by the proportion of mineral particles. These particles differ greatly in volume and surface area. 1 gram of clay has about 1,000,000 times the number of particles and 180,000 times the surface area compared to sand. These differences in volume and surface area greatly influence soil pore space. So what do we mean by soil structure? In general terms, structure is basically the shape that the soil takes based on its physical and chemical properties. But in more specific terms, soil structure describes the arrangement of the solid parts of the soil and of the pore space located between them. A fact that deserves emphasis is that soil contains not only particles but also spaces, pockets of air that are critical for its function. There are both large spaces called macropores and smaller spaces called micropores. We see then that soil structure is more than just the proportion of sand, silt, and clay. It really refers to how the soil particles are aggregated into secondary units. These relatively large units are formed primarily by the flocculation or clumping of soil colloids, clay and humus particles, through weak electrochemical interactions. This in turn traps other soil particles into a relatively organized group. Macropores hold air and are generally created by large particles packing loosely together. Micropores hold water via capillary action and are created by small particles packing tightly together. Aggregation is promoted through cycles of wetting and drying, freezing and thawing, by the activity of soil organisms, and by an increase in organic matter content. Aggregates vary in size and shape, and in their integrity and strength of association with one another. The resulting associations have very distinct formations that influence such properties as percolation, or the rate at which water moves through the soil. In general, clay soils have more pore spaces than sandy soils, but the pores in clay soils are much smaller than those in sandy soils, so they hold water tighter. This is why sandy soils drain much faster than clay soils. Spheroid or granular aggregates are characteristic of properly tilled mineral soils, especially those with high organic content. Organic matter holds particles together and improves the stability of the granules. The small pore spaces within the granules, again, are the micropores. Micropores that formed within each aggregate can be filled with water or air after a rain or irrigation event. Macropores form when aggregates clump together. The blend of macro and micropores in aggregates gives an excellent balance of pore types for crop growing. Now, another physical property of soil is bulk density, which measures the proportion of pore space to particles in a soil. As bulk density increases, pore space decreases. In general, sandy soils have a high bulk density because the mass or weight of the particles is great compared to the amount of pore space. Clay soils have a low bulk density because of the small particle size of clay and the high amount of micropores present. Determining bulk density is quite simple. Oven-dried soil has no free water in it, so the macro and micropores are only filled with air. By weighing a known volume of oven-dried soil, you can determine the bulk density. In the example here, a 20 milliliter volume of dry soil weighs 30 grams, so the bulk density is 1.5 grams per milliliter. The ability of a soil to hold water during drought and drain rapidly after a flood is dependent on both the amount of pore space, the bulk density, and the relative size of the individual pores. Water drains from large pores and is retained in small pores. An ideal mineral soil is one that is about 50% solid materials with about 45% particles and 5% organic matter, and 50% airspace, split equally between water held in pore spaces and air in macropore spaces. One half of the airspace should be macropores and one half should be micropores, in other words. So to reiterate, the key physical properties of soil are texture, structure, bulk density, and pore space. These properties are interrelated and influence the ability of plants to grow in a given soil. Soil scientists also look at color and temperature of soil as significant physical properties. The color provides some indication of general soil characteristics, such as the abundance of humus in black soils, or blue-gray as indicative of a reducing condition, or even the presence of possible contaminants. Temperature is important in thermal conductivity of the soil, often associated with the relative abundance of water in the soil. Now, an important aspect of analyzing and managing soils is soil sampling. Samples are used to examine the texture of a soil as well as in chemical analysis. Soil probes are often used to pull core samples from the ground, then analyzing the cores to understand the type of soil present. The core can be several inches in length, depending on the area being sampled. Collected samples can then be sent to a laboratory for further analysis. Now, the key points about soil physical properties can be summarized thus. Right? The proportion of sand, silt, and clay determines the texture of a mineral soil and its water-holding properties. Soil particles often occur in aggregates that can be several millimeters in size. The space between the aggregates provides macropores for air and water movement in the soil. Movement and exchange of air and water is much slower in micropores within aggregates. So as we look at this, let's review some questions that might help you understand the physical properties of soil. For example, what distinguishes mineral from organic soils? What is soil texture? What characteristics do macro and micropores determine in soil? What is the relationship in an ideal soil? Why are soil aggregates desirable for good soil characteristics? Why does clay have a lower bulk density than sand? In an ideal soil, what percent is solid and what percent is airspace? How much of the airspace should be able to hold water? These questions should help you think about the most important issues associated with soil physical properties.